You were a pioneer in this. How did you handle the naysayers and the people that said, man, you're a little whacked out, you're doing things different?
I heard that a lot. Well, what are you doing this year that's different? It started to be. But about 3 years after I started putting cross fencing in, when I first started, my dad says, what are you wasting your time with that for? 3 years later, he was walking around with rolls of polywire. I guess I was never much of one for going to the coffee shop, but then every once in a while I'll run into somebody after 10, 15 years, what are you doing different this year? And I just sort of like to take the backdoor approach. I'm not going to tell anybody how to do things, but I mentor and help a lot of different people. I probably average throughout the year about 20% FTE, full-time equivalent. And probably, if I look at it another way, I probably average up to 10 hours a week rubbing elbows with people that are calling, stopping in, whatever. And that's where we finally have now the Grazing Coalition grant monies, and we voucher our time, and we get reimbursed half of what we were to get. We put back in kind, and Mary Podal is around here somewhere, but we scratch each other's backs. We get compensated for what we've learned and what we don't know. And we learn through the networking. We say, oh, Jerry Doan is doing it this way. The Fearings are doing it that way. So and the Risers, they're doing things this way. Everybody has their own twists. It's locally site different every week. But I can tell you, I can never go back. A big benefit, met people all over the world. Some of the initial ones in early 80s, 1980, started cross fencing. 4 pasture twice over. Then it was 8 paddock level pasture. We use the word paddock because that's universal for pasture. And then our local district conservationist then, Ellen Ness, so those of us started going into 8 pasture level, paddock level, cell grazing. He started hauling us around, get together every summer. He would get a group of van load of us together that were starting to do it and haul us around to each other's places. And I think probably movements like that, Jerry, is where the Grazing Coalition really grassroots got started. Individual SCS employee, I'll credit one of them as Ellen Ness, 1980. That's a story you've never heard before. That's going back 41 years, so that was 1980. But now I think here's more replica of that site. This is more invasive. There's more smooth brome here, but there's a different story here. Some will cringe. Kevin Sedovic, Stan Bolts, this is invasive species. But at one time, my first wife started getting sicker, and I had more than I could handle. Had to do a lot of health care providing, and I was getting stressed out, wore out. Started renting my cropland out, and one of the first renters hired a plane to spray, and that doggone plane didn't shut off. Came out across, Affinity Wide Match Discover, other chemicals, even glyphosate, just wiped this out. So I did 2 winters. There's a neighbor over there who knows exactly what I'm talking about. He experienced that too. I did a lot of bale grazing here and then that slope going down. No, you couldn't rest at the recovery. Had to do something with it. So probably this slope over here behind you, Durnell, going down to the southwest. The one winter I probably fed 150 bale grazing right there, trying to kick it back. And I used a lot of slough hay, but somehow or another, well, it's coming in anyway, the smooth brome. That's part of why it's so solid here, smooth brome. But now we'll get into what I look at, monitoring infiltration, capturing that raindrop where it falls. That's part of the reason we're on the hilltop instead of down below on the more lush. If we get a heavy rain and have a pretty compacted soils, very shallow root system, heavy season-long grazing, years of it, compared to a lot of years of idle, no disturbance, have about the average same grass rooting depth. I'm not talking forbs, I said grasses. 3 to 5 inches. We get an inch of rain in an hour, or inch of rain in a half hour. How much of that is soaking in and how much of it is running down the hill on the surface? So as I started monitoring infiltration, probably at best, where's Jeff? He was in with this with me. He should be up here right beside me.
Where do you hide?
At best, what did we have here, Jeff? Infiltration. Maybe at best, some of that 1990 data with about 0.8 to 1.2 inches per hour.
I was going to look at that article, and I wish I would have.
I think it was around in that, a ballpark. It's a really elusive chasing figure because conditions can vary, whether the moisture conditions. So you can test it today and get a rain and come back a few days after that, everything is different. But I can get into that a little bit. But an average condition like today here, dry, how far down is it when you're digging to find moisture?
We didn't find any.
You did, we won't find any. It's probably 3-4 feet. We've been sort of on the dry side. Capture that raindrop here and get it to soak in. Then there's 4 flows of water on the landscape that are simple. Keep it simple from Dr. Jimmy Richardson. Surface flow. Water that runs down the hill on the surface. Infiltration. Capture that raindrop, it infiltrates. And how far does it soak in? And then it can go down the hill in the soil profile. Yeah. Surface flow, infiltration, through flow, reflow versus surface flow. How many of us have gotten stuck 2/3 of the way up the hillside, Durnell? That reflow point. Infiltration, through flow, it's coming out a reflow site. And then those reflow sites start moving when things start getting better. Then if we can capture it up here, some of the sites here, we think it looks like it's taking 9 months or longer to move a mile when we get it to infiltrate. Greg Sandus from State Health Department of Bismarck loves that. He says if everybody was doing this, capturing the raindrop where it falls, he wouldn't have a job. Well, there he is.
I'm glad you said good things.
I'm quoting, I think that's an exact quote from you, isn't it?
Well, yes it is. Yes it is.
But it isn't all that simple, because when I said things start varying, these sites, a lot of us know what it's like to replace a corner post when it's dry and hard. You chip and dig down 8 inches a foot, pour some water in, come back the next day. But now it's the reverse. The drier it is, the looser it is. Can you go get the shovel off the trailer there? I think it's in the front corner of the... Now it's the drier it is, the looser it is, starts getting wet, the soil aggregates start swelling, and then it gets tighter.
Give it to Prince, he knows how to use it. I don't.
Here, it's right in here you have more visible. Then I started doing, I just call it a 1 jump test.
Does that work?
And if it's real wet, you'd have a tough time pulling that shovel out because it just gets tight. Just a reverse relationship. The soil is more open to capturing that raindrop and keeping that soil covered. I believe Jay Fura says armor. Keeping it covered, keeping it shaded. I don't have a thermometer with me, but the soil surface temp's right here, where I mowed it here. But it'd probably be in the high 70s, maybe even 75 or 70 back here. But if it's bare in here, you don't want to take your socks off because it'll burn your feet. And then the soil microbes the higher the temp, they're starting to go dormant or go to sleep or die off for feeding the soil mycorrhizal activities. Just hundreds and hundreds of little things. And a lot of it, someone mentioned continual monitoring. Is it good to have photo points? Yes. I didn't do enough of it. So a lot of what I do have is old slides, and they sort of half deteriorated. But John and Annie, it's sort of like watching your kids grow up. When did that take place? All of a sudden, they're 6 inches taller. Day to day, you don't notice the changes. Jeff hasn't been here for a while. He used to be here a lot. He wasn't involved, didn't see these demo sites here at all until today, even though he suggested we do it. You know who did it. But Jeff, because you had the advantage of not seeing this several times a week, what would your comments be on the regrowth response?
Well, what would my thoughts be on the regrowth response? I guess it turned out kind of the way I was hoping it would, if that makes any sense. That the more recovery, the more leaf area you left on the plant, and the longer the recovery, the more growth you're going to get. Of course, all that's dependent on soil moisture also. The plant's not going to grow if it's in dry soil. And so that goes back to that root system. So keeping a healthy top on the plant means keeping a healthy root system, which can tap into that soil moisture. I'm surprised a little bit with the amount of regrowth we got on the brome grass. Generally being a cool season and beginning growth real early, it has come back quite well. You can see now on the native there, my untrained eye, when we got to the end where it had the most recovery, we didn't have a lot of difference between what had been mowed and what hadn't been mowed. In other words, inside the treatment and outside the treatment. Here you look down at the end where Stan's standing. You can see some differences there. It hasn't come back quite as much as the untreated brome grass. Oh, let's see. Gene, can you hear him? No.
Okay, following along with that is very sort of similar to the mostly native over there. From here on, it's starting to crash. But this is still basically sort of fair, your input.
So between, like Gene said, from here over and here over that way, what's the big difference between those two right there? Or what's the difference, I guess, on the sign?
3 clippings and 4 clippings, you got 45 days and 30 days.
Yeah, 45 days and 30 days.
3 clippings, that's the days, it's the number of days.
Yeah, I think that's one of the keys, and Jeff mentioned it already, is the amount of recovery, after when you come back and graze it again. And I like to think of, 3 things that really are critical to managing grass, and that's the recovery, the amount of recovery that you have on it, the percent utilization, or how much and Jeff mentioned these already, and then changing season of use is a good tool. If you can use those 3 things, then and keep those in mind, you can do a lot of good management decisions, kind of keeping those in the back of your mind. Did you want to pour an inch of water on over here, Gene? Or did you have something else?
Where do you have your ring?
Where the flags are, right there.
You want to explain
Okay.
what this process is?
So that's not the water. That's my drinking water. Well, I'll explain it right over here. Yeah. So what Gene mentioned, and our state conservationist down in South Dakota, he's got a little quote. He says, "Be very selfish with the water that comes on your ranch, and you want every drop of water that falls on your ranch to stay on your ranch." And I kind of like that quote. All right, so what we do here is this is just a little infiltration test. I think both North Dakota and South Dakota have infiltration kits. you can get a hold of these. It's a 6-inch ring in diameter, and
Piece from an old grain auger.
this and what Gene has is steel because he's got rocks. A lot of times we just use aluminum, but either one works. It's 6 inches in diameter, roughly about 6 inches tall, and you pound it in so there's 2 to 3 inches remaining above ground, like I did here, and then you put an inch of water on and you time it. And what we did, and one thing too is you want to actually put 2 inches of water on, so the first inch gets it wet through the profile, and then the second inch is kind of what you actually time to compare to one site to the next. So the first inch just makes everything the same wetness. And then when you pour the water in, just make sure you don't just dump it right on top of the soil. You pour it over your hand, or we use cellophane sometimes to pour it onto. But it's still going here. But then you keep track of that time, and that'll give you a good idea of what your infiltration is on that.
Okay, and while that is soaking in, would you like to put a drop of water in this for me?
Okay.
There's a way of monitoring fungal bacterial ratios. This is sort of dry right now, but you take that moist and crush it and take a sniff. The more favorable fungal to bacterial, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. That's pretty ideal, I think, from what I've heard. But, and also
Oops.
a little too much.
Yeah, sorry.
We'll get another one.
All right. I can't do two things at once here.
But it's a very low fungal, high bacterial. This will sort of stay dry, and that drop of water will just go straight through into the palm of your hand.
Just one drop, huh?
Yeah. A little more. You can do a little more.
Okay.
That's good.
All right.
Now, count to 10, and the palm of my hand should still basically be dry. It soaked it all up. Very, very good fungal bacterial ratio. But if it's a very off-balance fungal to bacterial ratio, that would pretty much go straight through, and this would be dry, and the drop would be in the palm of my hand. And start saying the landscape's repelling water, would that be?
Yeah.
That's just checking the thatch and the
Yeah. How
mulch with
does it smell real good, or is it pungent? And carbon nitrogen ratio, it pretty much crumbles. But if it's high carbon, low nitrogen, it stays forever. Like those corn stalks out in the cropland 3 years later, they're still there.
Yeah. So one of the things when you mentioned this before too, Gene. I mean, you've got good cover. What are the soil health principles we talk about? We talk about maximize cover. In rangeland, I like to say optimize cover. Minimize disturbance, and with rangeland, I like to say optimize disturbance. Diversity. Diversity above ground equals diversity below ground. And then keep a living root throughout as much of the year as you can. So when you look at this it is pretty solid smooth brome. We're probably meeting most of those. Do you think? And we've got production. We've got forage for the cattle and whatnot too. But one of the differences you don't see between those plots over there and over here is the critters that are underground. And like Gene mentioned, if you take a spade of this soil here and smell it, it's probably not going to smell as nice as it will over there on the native. And that's a sign that the biology here has been affected. And what happens with smooth brome is it doesn't have critters that it gets along with, like mycorrhizal fungi. There's not a native mycorrhizal fungi that can live with smooth brome because it's a non-native species. So that's an advantage of having native over non-native.
All of that above, or what you've just said, Stan, that's one reason it's going in slower here. It'll go in 2 to 3 times faster over there. It's just pretty much monoculture smooth brome. We don't have the benefits of all the different forbs and the deeper rooting structures. It's just basically a brome grass mat. That's why it's going in a little slower here. but it's still going in faster than it used to 40 years ago. And I'll never get there in that journey to where I'd like it to be, because it's a journey. I don't know can't set it as a destination. So if we have a destination, we get there, then what the heck do we do? Right, Daryl?
Other than the differences in soil biology that Stan just talked about, is this a different ecological site than that?
Is this a different ecological site than over there? I'll let...
So we didn't dig a hole right in the plots. I'm suspecting maybe, I don't know where Jeff or Mark is at. Right in the plots, it might be a loamy, but certainly on the edge of it, it's not. That's a different ecological site. It's a thin loamy, right?
Yeah, that was local one.
Yep,
Bottom of the plot.
and here this is a good solid loamy. And basically a loamy is a typically deeper, darker soil. Thin loamy has got a thinner surface. One of the things I think you mentioned the difference in biology. All right. Another difference though is soil structure. And when you look at the structure here, right at the surface, even though this is a loamy site that should be more productive, the structure right at the surface is blocky. Now, if you break it apart further, you can break it into granular, but when you look at that structure, it's blocky. If you happen to walk past those plots, look at the profile over there. The surface structure over there is granular. So we have a difference in soil structure, and that's built over time with biology and roots and all the things that go into it. It's not bad, but it's not as good probably as if we had the native species. That's another advantage. Advantage to native, disadvantage to anyway.
Is there anything that can be done to encourage diversity here over this invasive species?
I always like to say start with grazing management, and start to see if you're going to get a response that way, because that's the first thing to do. And a lot of times there'll be natives there that you didn't realize, and if you get that good grazing management back in there, they'll start to express themselves. You want to add anything else to that?
Yes, that's where in the past I've tried managing for and or against specific species. Brome grass in here, Kentucky bluegrass invasive, that's a big one. I can be fair at it, but then all of a sudden the weather pattern can change and get a wet fall or a wet spring, and all of a sudden we get a little bit of a yellow blossom sweet clover flush somewhere, and then because of that extra nitrogen produced from there, then boom, the next year. So I'm pretty fair at it, but I've gotten so I don't even try to do that anymore. All I try to do is manage diversity for soil health enhancement. Give every species out there, give them a periodic chance by changing the time and timing, where the animals are at, and for how long. Maybe a little heavier impact, a little less, a light grazing, maybe, and then 75, 90 days later, bring them back to growing season rest I'm talking about. And nothing's ideal. We'll never get to what we would like to picture, but I can tell you it's a heck of a lot better than I used to have it. And it's a lot better than when I moved on this place.